page and highlight the subtleties lurking inside an otherwise quiet poem. And this happened to me many times as I read the finalists' poems for the Julia Darling Poetry Prize. It was hard to select the several moving and startling and evocative submissions carrying so much wisdom, richness of design, awareness of the heightening power of poetry. And in making this very difficult decision, I had to reach into all of the reasons that I love poetry in order to discern one from the other and so many beautiful accomplishments and voices. So it must be much more than a collection of words achieving an aesthetic mastery of its voice, its own poetics. Yes, that is hard enough, as you know, poets and fiction writers. And it needs to dive into and somehow expose, I think, the world of metaphysics that we can only access through poetry and its magical transformation of the undercurrents of our physical world interlaced with our consciousness. And it must do so musically, with elements of surprise and word packages alongside the controlled shape of line and stanza that reinforce the what of the poem. And the voice. How does a poem capture the voice of an era in our consciousness? What does it state explicitly that we need to understand better? We live in a troubled time where the voice and message dictate power, where equity is finally being questioned with a hard and honest look, where brown and other marginalized voices are being heard, disrupting the status quo. But the work of disruption belongs to all of us who want to take a stand against any form of oppression. And the poem by John Blair takes such a stand, querying a God who could allow us to hurt one another so much. So the poem, The Shape of Things to Come by John Blair, it was a poem that faces the question that we all must have had, I think, when we learned the magnitude of the destruction that could be caused by nuclear power. What were those scientists thinking? Didn't they know? Why did they allow this? And the poem delivers quite an answer. It is painfully universal in its subject, and it is also brave. Who among us has not been shaped in some way by the mere knowledge of the atomic bomb, an invention that altered all of human history, that threatens our place in the cosmos? Our poet not only has the courage to take on such a subject, but also has the skill to do so with masterful control over a complex tone that buttresses the glass-like phrasing, offering clarity on one of the darkest subjects in our human history. The moment when Hungarian-American physicist Leo Szilard envisioned the tragic contribution to human technology, his morbid masterpiece, the nuclear chain reactor. This poem is spiritually wise, and it is such an honor to introduce Mr. Blair. He was born in St. Petersburg, Florida, and has a PhD from Tulane University. His work appears everywhere, including poetry, the Southern Review, Antioch Review, American Literature, and countless others, which I have back here. He directs the undergraduate creative writing program at Texas State University, and his awards for poetry and fiction are numerous, including the Dana Award in Poetry, the Tampa Review Prize in Poetry, the Florida Review Editors Prize in Poetry, the Tusculum, not sure how to say it, Review Prize in Fiction, and so many others. He is the author of 3 poetry collections, Playful Song, called Beautiful, The Green Girls, and The Occasions of Paradise. He is also the author of a short story collection, American Standard. Please give your warm welcome, applause, and attention to this wonderful writer who is helping us with some of the hardest subjects of our era.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Twice a year, in New Mexico, at the White Sands Missile Base, they open up for public
visitation, the Trinity site, which is where the first atomic bomb was set off back in July of 1945. And then, of course, a few weeks later, they dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. They open up for 6 hours in the spring, 6 hours in the fall. I'm going to go again this April, but it's a fairly nondescript sort of site. It's just sort of a shallow depression where the bomb sort of excavated a little bit and turned all the topsoil into what they call trinitite, which is kind of a green radioactive glass. I went there a few years ago with my son, who is a physicist, and we just wanted to visit, and we visited. And it was the ordinariness of it, very, very much a sort of national park sort of experience, people pulling up in Winnebagos and walking with their dogs out where this bomb had exploded. It's still mildly radioactive out there. They say you should be careful about not inhaling the dust and all that. I was worried about the dogs. But that's where these poems started. This poem and several others that I've been writing about the beginnings of the atomic age. The particular poem that Natalie picked out that chose for this award is called The Shape of Things to Come, and it is about Leo Szilard, who was a Hungarian scientist who was one of the first to really start figuring out exactly how the whole thing worked. By the whole thing, I mean the structure of the atom and how a nuclear chain reaction can be initiated. He was the first one to come up, in fact, with the idea of the nuclear chain reaction. And supposedly, the story he tells is this happened while he was stepping off of a sidewalk into the street, across the street, and it was raining, and there was a drop of water hanging from the brim of his hat. And seeing that water sort of part from itself and join all the other drops falling to the pavement brought immediately to his mind the possibility that a neutron chain reaction could be initiated in certain sorts of materials. And so that's what this poem is about. Again, it's called The Shape of Things to Come, and it starts with a quotation from the writer Richard Rhodes from his book, The Making of the Atomic Bomb. Szilard stepped off the curb. As he crossed the street, time cracked open before him, and he saw a way to the future. Death into the world and all our woe, the shape of things to come. It is 1933, and it begins, as things sometimes do, with a drop of rain, with a man stepping off of a curb, deep in some kind of thought about the nature of divisibility. His mind trained like an unseeing eye to see through a wet scrim of impossible, because reality is attention, is the second look that the world gives us because we dared look back. And through our givens, our putatives, our Weltanschauung, like the air that we pass through mid-step, one-footed between the pavement and the cobblestones, a vision comes, divides. Here from now, God from reason, clean from broken, two from one single pendulous drop, hung just barely from the felted edge of his black hat's brim. Though not just one drop in and of itself, but one drop becoming two, an exquisite liquid parting, charged with all the simple art of mitosis, of fission, his mind's eye seeing down and deep, past the misted uncertainty of electron shells, to the innermost Sibylline crux, the kernel, unbroken and unbloomed, of a nucleus, the shivering of discontinuity, gelid in the gloaming, a center giving way to destiny, to torrents, to exponential chains of uncoupled mass, inevitable as rain falling in its multitudes, as any moment stretched to breaking, finally letting go, to drop like a lie from a lip, like a child, every child, dropping from grace, from innocence, a child, every child, 1 foot hovered over the stony surface of inevitability, try that again, whose God still calls his name in the wilderness, whose God still in all his burning An unreasonable glory loves him. Just not enough as the gate to the garden swings shut, as the drop drops and a shoe touches worn leather to wet and weeping cobblestones to save him. And that's the shape of things to come. The second poem is also about Dr. Slizard, and he and another physicist were trying to find Dr. Einstein. They had gotten to the point in their research where they realized something very big, something very terrible was going to come from all of this, and they couldn't get anybody in charge, anybody in the American government to really listen to them, but they knew that they could get them to listen to Albert Einstein. So Albert Einstein was on vacation in Long Island, and so they went looking for him in these little vacation communities, just stopping people in the street. Do you know where Dr. Einstein is staying? And that's what this poem is about. It's called Seeking Dr. Einstein. And it's also got a quote. It's from Steve Schenken's book, Bomb, The Race to Build and Steal the World's Most Dangerous Weapon. And the quote is, Slizard leaned his sweaty head out the car window. Say, he began, do you by any chance know where Einstein lives? Even genius has a summer, hazy perhaps with possibility, but edging towards decoherence or decadence, towards sunsets or revelation, war, crackling dark static on the radio, and the town, Kuchog, it was called, quaint, the sea just over there wearing its paint-peeled skirt of houses, compelled to whispers and watching as two men, two physicists, both Hungarian, both lost in seaside Americana, wander, their black car bellying ominous as a U-boat along the Long Island shore, seeking Dr. Einstein on his holiday, to tell him the explosive news of fission, to persuade him to persuade a president that the unseeable is terribly real. And it's terribly coming, right or wrong, us or them. A winter logic in a summer simmering with anticipation. And though the man himself somewhere waits, relaxed, his pipe in hand, the world like somebody's oyster cracking itself open, safely, for now, out of sight. And a boy walks just ahead, huck-finned on the roadside, a fishing rod on his shoulder, contemplative. To guide them like Virgil, one appeared in front of my eyes who seemed hoarse from long silence, to the great man's hermitage. They hang for now suspended between stern Lundrang and the rattling clarities of vocation for as long as forever takes, on the verge of turning back or going on just a little farther, balanced exquisitely in the heat summer of 1939, radio waves humming inside their bones with news that will always be new, for as far as radiation travels among the bodies celestial, where any star might suddenly flare to mark how they, like kings or prophets, bearing wonderful, unspeakable gifts, come. You probably know that sort of the central figure in all of this was J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was as good at corralling physicists as he was at being a physicist himself. But he was the man who was always keeping things going when they were threatening to fall apart at Los Alamos and the development of the nuclear bomb. But he was a weird guy. Oppenheimer was in a lot of ways. When he was younger, he was at Oxford, and he'd suddenly left Oxford to go hiking on the island of Corsica, and he'd left behind on the desk of his tutor a poisoned apple, literally a poisoned apple, trying to kill his tutor, who fortunately didn't eat the apple. So Oppenheimer stayed out of prison long enough to help build it. But This poem is actually about a later attempt at poisoning that he and Enrico Fermi got up to, where when they at first started producing atomic isotopes, their first thought wasn't an atomic bomb. Their first thought was, well, let's just poison a whole bunch of German people with radioactive isotopes. This is called The Art of Poison. And it also has a quote. This is from a letter that Oppenheimer wrote to Fermi. He said, "In this connection, I think we should not attempt a plan unless we can poison food sufficient to kill 500,000 men." Yeah, I know. And it's so casual. The whole letter's like that. What are you doing next Tuesday? We need to kill 500,000 men if we're going to mess with this. I kind of approached this by considering Romeo and Juliet, the art of the poison, and Romeo talking about the effectiveness of poison in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. "Oh, true apothecary," Romeo cries, as the poison, monkshood likely, or cyanide, burns lovely and fictional in his veins. "Thy drugs are quick." Though quick, we know, is half as good as sure, and always less than tragic. Because in the art of poison, numbers do sometimes count. Corpses copious as mushrooms lumping up from a forest floor, wicked witch confections honeyed in the leaf mold, blushing like apples and leaded like Roman wine and sweet gasoline, mephitic even. The whiff of chlorine gas or lurid isotopes babbling hypnotic in the imperturbable waters of a physicist's barbarous and patriotic mind. Or even love, so toxically careless that it stains a young man's cheek with belladonna crimson, his lips and tongue blanched bitterweed with the sin that they have took. "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, little thief of innocence. All cherry in the rosy vines, declare your killing heart. Sin from my lips, young Montague demurs, oh, trespass sweetly urged. The drugs we take are quick. The drugs we give are even quicker. We hold our lovers' breaths beneath the deepest sorts of water until the breathing stops. Passion looped like pretty ribbon. That makes more sense. Passion looped like pretty ribbon through its own beginning. The boy cast out who always dies, who pours his draught into a girlish ear and whispers, "Oh love, oh life, not life, but love and death. Coy as a serpent, lucid on a garden path, who importunes the night, give me my sin again." And just one more. That one's longish, so I'm going to skip that one. This is called In the Tin Factory. You're probably familiar with the first real book about the tragic nature of the quest for mastery of the bomb, John Hershey's Hiroshima, which he wrote shortly after Hiroshima was bombed. He'd interviewed people who had survived and who had seen the horrors of what had happened when that bomb was set off. One of the stories they recorded was this woman who worked as a clerk in a tin factory. And she said she'd been looking out the window just before, I want to say it was 8:15 when the bomb went off, just before 8:15. And she turned to talk to somebody else, another woman in the room, and then things started coming apart, and a shelf full of books fell on top of her. And that's sort of the image that this poem develops. It's called In the Tin Factory. And it too starts with a quote, this one from John. "First moment of the atomic age, a human being was crushed by books. The books themselves are rubble, abandoned shrines of moments, rumors and misrule shouting through doorways bright as salt. Miss Sasaki sits at her desk, her body held in a calm pretense of dutiful, of useful waiting, the way cherry blossoms wait forever in a kimono's print to wither. After the bomb, some of the women of Hiroshima would wear flowers until they themselves withered. Perfect blooms burned into their skin by a light so bright it heated the dark patterns. on their kimonos like the metal of a branding iron. And the shells, in their rigid orders, are made of heavy oak and painted white, the color of industry, the color of empty, the color of death, color of the serpent god Hakucha no Myojin, who in the book of folk tales right above Miss Sazaki's head perpetually strangles rogue samurai in their sleep. And the color makes Miss Sasaki remember a novel she has been reading about the snowy North Country. A young geisha lost in her poverty, the handsome traveler who loves her and leaves her inevitably behind. How the afternoon moon paints itself like ardor above unbroken fields of pale buckwheat flowers as the traveler in his train alone homeward goes, every horizon and rail, every line, tracing every edge. A separation of here from there, of the past from whatever consummation still hovers on the other side of now. It is 8:14. She is looking at the window. In a minute, she will look away, thinking to speak to the girl at the next desk about something she can never afterwards remember. But before that, in the moments before after begins, she sees through the tall panes absolutely nothing. Not even a sky or rooftops or some kind of cloud. Only a featureless waiting to be that fills her not with dread, but with longing. What do you call the world? A priest at the hydrangea temple of Ajisadera once asked her father, and her father replied without hesitation, I am the world. I name the world myself. And now she thinks this light is the name of the world before it is written, and the window is its book. Like pages too bright for words, this day, like any other day, like any other story, relentless and forever about to begin. Thank you very much.